and it's a busy time. We felt it was really important because one, as you know, the Senate Finance Committee began to mark up the bill today. Ways and Means will most likely, I'm not sure if it's official, do it, start later this week. But even more importantly, the Prime Minister from Japan is going to come to the United States next week. There you are. I said I knew you were coming in any minute. And then I thought we should start. I hadn't said anything except what we were doing.
I'll say nothing when I get up.
And I said, what I did say, Dan, is I think we need to do it again with the room change because of, but that with the Senate, this is as far as I got with the Senate markup, House Ways and Means coming. But most importantly, that with the Japanese Prime Minister's visit next week, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And what I think is particularly important to those of us is that there are people saying that the auto industry thinks this, the auto industry is happy, etc. And I think you're going to hear from the panel here today that the auto industry continues to have very real concerns. Passed out and available to you is also going to be documents that have been prepared by the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee on the importance of currency manipulation disciplines in TPP and the need to address it, which will also provide you with a lot of facts that are important. For those of you who know me, I'm a Detroit girl, born and bred. I'm a car girl. Auto industry is in my blood, and more importantly, it's the backbone of the Michigan economy. So I don't run away from it. I think it's really important, and I think we need to understand how important the auto industry is to the economy in this country. And that's why it's important that you have the facts. I'm proud to be joined by such a distinguished panel today to discuss the trade deal before Congress and how it does affect the auto industry. There are a lot of concerns about the fast track bill, but one of the most important is the currency manipulation issue. After decades of watching our manufacturing jobs move overseas, American manufacturers have added 334,000 jobs in the first 2 years of this decade. And if we don't take action to stop currency manipulation, other benefits of a free trade agreement are going to be wiped out. We need to take action to assure that any trade agreement addresses currency manipulation. And as I keep making this point, it's a very simple point to understand. With the yen at 120 to a dollar, the Japanese a Japanese vehicle has an $8,000 cost advantage per vehicle that they're using to undercut the price of auto parts, advertising, or the cost of an automobile. And I've said it 1,000 times, we build the best cars in the world. Our workers can compete with anybody, but they can't compete with the Bank of Japan, and they can't compete with the Japanese government. And we need a United States government that's going to fight for our workers. It's currency manipulation is the mother of all trade barriers. For workers, it means lost jobs. A study by the Economic Policy Institute estimates that currency manipulation by Japan is connected with up to 981,000 lost American jobs, including hundreds of thousands in the manufacturing sector. So I want to get onto the panel because I think it's important before people have to go to the next markup to hear from them. Speaking first will be Rep. Dan Kildee. He represents his district that's at the core of the auto industry, shares many of the same issues that I do. We've got the same, we don't have the same plans. We've got plans and we've got the auto workers and we care deeply. He's a passionate advocate for rebuilding a strong American manufacturing sector, and he's a great partner to work with in Congress. Following Rep. Kildee will be Josh Nasser. Josh is the legislative director for the UAW. He represents 390,000 auto workers across the country, and he's going to talk about how currency manipulation hurts American workers and their families. Next will be Fred Bergston. Fred is a senior fellow and director emeritus of the Peterson Institute of International Economics and was the founding director over 30 years ago. He's a member of the President's Advisory Committee on Trade Policy and Negotiation and co-chairman of the Private Sector Advisory Group to the United States-India Trade Policy Forum. He has previously served in a wide range of prominent roles advising world leaders on trade and competitiveness. You need to understand that Fred is really one of, when Fred is here telling you things, you need to pay attention to them because he's not exactly some people might look at the UAW and Dan and I and say, well, what do you expect? Fred is not somebody, he is worried about this agreement, and I hope you're gonna listen. And the next person, Governor Matt Blunt, Republican from the state of Missouri, is president of the American Automotive Policy Council. He served as governor of Missouri from 2005 to 2009. He represents the 3 domestic auto manufacturers. And that's why it's so important to hear from this panel today. Because when the Prime Minister comes next week, people are going to say that the autos don't have currency, or they're going to give you a lot of misfacts. We want you to have the facts as we're entering into these trade agreements. So Dan, you are up. Thanks.
And if you don't mind, I'll just sit here. Everybody can hear all right? I'll just take a couple of minutes. First of all, I want to say thank you to Debbie, Congresswoman Dingell, not just for her hosting this particular event, but for being such a strong partner on this question. She comes to Congress with a real understanding of particularly the American auto industry, but a real strong understanding of trade and its implications. And like Debbie, we're all in favor in this Congress. You can poll us all. We're in favor of increasing American production of products and trade across the country. We want to increase exports, but we want to have an economy that is sustainable. And we understand the interconnectedness of our economies across the globe. That is something that is a reality that is inescapable. Having said that, details matter in these trade deals. And one of the frustrations, Congresswoman Dingell mentioned that, one of the frustrations that a lot of us have had is that we continue to hear about how currency can't be addressed within the constraints of a complicated multilateral trade agreement like this. Well, there's a lot of complications in these deals that somehow are able to be manifest in titles that are negotiated, and I don't happen to believe that we can't effectively address currency. I come from Flint, Michigan, and I know that the challenges that my community has faced, I just had left a meeting with somebody from the Federal Reserve talking about the challenges of older industrial cities, particularly my hometown of Flint. I know that it wasn't bad trade deals or the lack of proper currency provisions in those trade deals that is the sole cause of the loss of 90% of the manufacturing jobs in my hometown. But I also know that it was a contributing factor. And if we don't acknowledge that, and when we're working on trade policy in this country, acknowledge that especially in the auto sector, but not only in the auto sector, currency is a pretty substantial issue. And that if we're going to have a trade agreement, it would be the largest trade agreement ever imagined, and the largest trade agreement ever entered into, that you would deal with the most significant impediment to free trade in particularly a sector that is so critical to the American economy, but beyond the auto sector as well. The things that you'll hear are that we can't somehow effectively address currency in this agreement, because then we would have to start over. Okay, I don't see, there's no clock ticking, there's no TPP clock ticking on the wall that says by a date certain we have to have a Trans-Pacific partnership agreed to. There's nothing that says we can't do this right. And so my view would be Congress has a legitimate role. In fact, Congress has a singular constitutional role in regulating trade, and we ought to assert our role, and we ought to insist that if we're going to be asked to consider an agreement that would affect the greatest trading relationships, the largest trading partnerships in the world, that we ought to deal with the single greatest, I think, the single greatest impediment, and that is the ability of nations to enter into manipulation of currency in order to affect the trade balance. The other thing that we'll hear, and I'm really interested in the panel, because I'm just familiar enough with this subject to speak for a few minutes on it, but I'm really interested in hearing more on this question, we're going to hear a lot from folks, particularly inside the administration, but others as well, saying that if we introduce a significant trade provision into this Trans-Pacific Partnership, that we could put our own monetary policy in a position where it could be interpreted to be currency manipulation. Not by any of the tests that I've seen. And if I am supposed to accept the premise that there's a sort of, you'll know it when you see it approach when it comes to human rights violations, or you'll know it when you see it when it comes to labor law, or you'll know it when you see it when it comes to environmental protection, or you'll know it when you see it when it comes to all the other provisions that we're going to see in this agreement that have, I think, at least so far, really weak enforcement provisions. Why is it that we can't take that approach and include a surely complicated, but not more complicated than many of the other provisions, a currency provision? We know that any rational standard that would be applied on currency manipulation would not include U.S. use of quantitative easing for its own monetary policy. Everybody that I've talked to would say that the test applied would not put us in that place. So let's not make that a rhetorical point, or let's not allow that to be used as a rhetorical point without truth testing this. So that's actually why I'm here now, to no longer speak but to listen. So with that, why don't I stop and we'll go from there. Thank you all very much. And again, Debbie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Josh?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Congressman Kildee, Congressman Dingell, and also Congressman Trott for sponsoring
I
today.
forgot to say that. That is the most important thing, is that Congressman Trott, I'm guilty moving my room to thank David Trott, who's from Michigan. Everybody just wants to get the information about currency manipulation. I apologize. That's my fault. Thank you, Josh.
Sure. So, first of all, the story of the U.S. auto industry is a very positive story. The auto recovery is bringing tens of thousands of jobs back. With the U.S. auto industry is a leading export manufacturing sector. There's a lot of good news that's been going on, and that's because of a lot of sacrifices that have been made by our members, by companies, by retirees, and honestly, the administration and many in Congress deserve a lot of credit for that. Now, our concern, and we're open for competition. Okay, we have a very competitive auto market here, and we're not afraid of competition. The problem here is that we're really concerned that the TPP, as it currently stands, could really undermine this recovery over time and could lead to less manufacturing in the United States and could be very harmful to our economy more generally. I want to talk for a minute about, in advance of the President's meeting with the Prime Minister Abe, about the bilateral talks with Japan. So the United States and Japan, for several years, well before Japan entered the TPP in 2013, have been having discussions on autos, agriculture, and some other issues. And that bilateral process is designed so eventually it will be folded into the broader agreement. Now, when Japan joined the TPP, as a condition, they agreed to the longest tariff phase-out period of any product in the TPP on automobiles and on trucks. They did not make that agreement on auto parts, and auto parts is a huge part of the auto industry. Now, we called for UAW. We thought it was very important. Japan is the most closed auto market in the developed world. There are 34 out of 34 out of OECD countries. 7% imports. Hyundai Kia from Korea has pulled out. It's not a hospitable environment, to put it mildly, for imports. Okay? In contrast, we have a very competitive marketplace. Here's the issue, though. Japan keeps their market closed through non-tariff barriers, not through tariffs. We, on the other hand, okay, we have a terrible trade deficit with Japanese and autos. It's a 100-to-1 ratio. 100 Japanese cars are shipped here. For every one car we ship and sell over there. And that is done without tariffs on our automobiles or on our trucks or cars. So that means that when the negotiators, are reducing tariffs, there's nothing for the Japanese to do because they're already at zero. But meanwhile, we do have tariffs on their automobiles and on their trucks. So our concern is that a 99-to-1 ratio could get much worse under this agreement. So we believe that currency manipulation, as has been discussed, really needs to be part of the bilateral discussions. It is not part of the bilateral discussions, number one. Number two, there is nothing in the bilateral talks that assures that Japan actually opens their market. There's a good faith effort, no doubt. But administration, since the Reagan administration, has tried to open Japan's market, and they've all been unsuccessful. What leads us to believe the result's going to be different this time? I'd like to hear why. So, from our standpoint, it's important to realize that the Japanese-U.S. auto negotiations are very limited in scope. They're not talking about currency. They're not talking about meaningful conditions to actually open Japan's market. So I want everyone, I hope, to keep that in mind when you hear about the Japanese-U.S. Discussions. So another thing I wanted to just mention is the interplay with fast track. If fast track passes, then efforts to get the TPP to address currency manipulation, to actually open Japan's market, will be unsuccessful. They will be unsuccessful. So we at UAW, we really believe that we've got to get the TPP right. We have not taken an oppositional position to the TPP, and we're strongly opposed to the passage of fast track. And we really think that if we're going to have a modern agreement, we've got to deal with one of the most pressing problems, which is currency manipulation. So, this isn't a partisan issue. It's not an ideological issue. It's about having a level playing field and fair trade, because, again, we're not afraid of competition here. We embrace it. But in order for it to work, there has to be rules that address the biggest problems. So happy to, I know we're going to have a discussion and answer questions, but I'm going to just leave it at that. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
To underline what our chair said, I do not represent the auto industry or speak for it or have any personal, financial, or other relationship with it at all. But that is a disclaimer at the start. Let me agree with the chair. Currency manipulation is the mother of all unfair trade practices. It is the biggest protectionist, mercantilist step in the modern era, and maybe of all time. And I'll give you the numbers to support that rather strong statement. Colleagues at our Peterson Institute and I have published 2 or 3 major studies on this over the last 2 or 3 years. Plenty of time for people to refute them, nobody has. What they showed was that over roughly the last decade, about 20 countries, most notably China, but other Asians and others as well, about 20 countries have been manipulating their currencies to the tune of an average of about $1 trillion per year. And that's a conservative estimate with all sorts of adjustments and takebacks and all that, so as not to overstate the case. China was clearly the biggest. At the height of its manipulation, it was spending $1 to $2 billion per day to buy U.S. currency, keep the dollar up, the renminbi down, to improve their competitive position. At the height of that activity, that was undervaluing the Chinese currency in trade terms by 30 to 40%, which is the equivalent of a 30 to 40% subsidy on all its exports and a 30 to 40% surcharge on all its imports. And if anybody doesn't think that has a lot of impact on trade, they don't know what trade's all about. So it's a huge, huge issue. We then tried to estimate what were the economic effects of all that. Our bottom line was twofold. That the intervention, this is not just China, this is all the 20 countries, probably shifted global trade balances from deficit countries to the surplus countries who were manipulating by somewhere between $200 billion and $500 billion per year, which means a shift of that amount of production output, jobs, etc., from the deficit countries to the surplus countries. And note that this was happening right through the Great Recession. This was happening at a time when we had very high unemployment, when the loss of jobs for any reason was serious, but particularly when it's done by somebody else's unfair practice. We estimated that the job effect on the U.S. ranged somewhere between $1 and $5 million. That's a hard number to nail down, therefore a fairly wide range. 1 million seems to be enough to worry about it, it's even just 1 million. But I should tell you, and we wrote this up, that the 5 million estimate came from the Federal Reserve model. When we gave them our trade numbers and they cranked it through their macro model, they got the higher trade numbers, so we put that into our range. But as I say, 1 million would be enough. So it is the mother of all unfair trade practices. Has to be dealt with, is obviously a key trade issue. Now, I hasten to say, and this is very important, that the severity of this problem has actually declined over the last year or two. The Chinese currency has gone up a lot, its trade surplus has come down a lot, still very high. But there has been a decline in the amount of intervention. Maybe they've gotten the message, maybe the administration's a little bit right in saying it's had some impact, but the numbers have come down substantially. I hasten to tell you I don't take much comfort from that. If you look at the Treasury's own latest report 2 weeks ago, it hammered the issue. It said Chinese surplus is going back up. There are new countries that we're concerned about, like Korea. They specified in Korea pretty hard. And we know the issue will come back. How do we know? I've been in this business 50 years. It always does come back. Different countries, different guises, but it always comes back. Current policy, to the extent you can call it that, is totally reactive. The other country violates and manipulates and has economic effect, and then we react, and maybe we have a little effect down the line, but it's always long after the kitty is out of the bag. So what we need is policies that deter credibly. Meaning, anybody who's going to do it knows he's going to get hit, and how he's going to get hit. Hopefully there would be then credible sanctions included in the deterrence so as to avoid these insidious practices in the future. And it seems to me that's the objective of the current exercise, and that's why I support what you're talking about. Let me take just one more minute and answer Congressman Kildee's question about the distinction between manipulation and QE, or monetary policy. He's exactly right. And I've actually said to Secretary Lew, if you can't defend the United States against that kind of criticism, you don't deserve to be in your job, because it's a very easy one to answer. Currency manipulation occurs when China buys dollars in the foreign exchange market, directly aimed at currency, directly aimed at exchange rates, through intervening in foreign exchange markets. QE is aimed at domestic purposes. We're trying to beef up the domestic economy by using monetary policy. We do it through buying domestic instruments. The Fed buys mortgage-backed securities, treasuries, etc. Purely domestic